Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, November 25th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the state of Wisconsin and news from a Wisconsin politics reporter, J.R. Ross, reporting that the Wisconsin Supreme Court has reportedly appointed separate three-judge panels to hear two lawsuits seeking new congressional boundaries in time for the 2026 midterm elections. Now, if you've been tracking all of this redistricting fiascos all across the country, the arguments between Democrats and Republicans, and this constant shift around, which states are going to be redrawing, which states are going to benefit Republicans, which states are going to benefit Democrats, we have found that the redistricting battle has been quite interesting across the board. And it's not just interesting because it's something that, piques our interest as people who engage in this political conversation and enjoy political analysis. It also has severe national implications that new congressional boundaries could absolutely rewrite and rechange what we might see in the upcoming midterms for both sides of the aisle. And redistricting, as we've seen it so far in Texas and Missouri and North Carolina, that has been passed by state legislatures, or in some cases like California by the voters, have been done so on a strictly partisan basis. Very rarely have we seen in the middle of the decade successful court cases that have thrown out congressional maps over issues that should have been raised years ago. But in Utah, that all changed this year when a judge in Utah declared that the state's congressional districts were unconstitutional and they could not be used in 2026 or any of the years beyond. And we saw that the judge ultimately took a map put forth by the plaintiffs, the Democrats seeking to overturn the congressional boundaries, that guaranteed a Democratic district in 2026. And this new district that's being put into effect by the state of Utah is one that takes away a seat from Republicans, likely forcing a retirement early for some of these representatives from the state of Utah. Despite it being a state that, overwhelmingly votes for the GOP, Democrats will be guaranteed representation through the remainder of the decade. And now taking a look at the next court case that seems to be coming about, which has not been on many people's radar, we've talked about it quite a bit, is the state of Wisconsin, where this new decision and this appointment from the Wisconsin Supreme Court pretty much acknowledges what we've known for quite some time, that this state Supreme Court, that back in June made a surprise announcement they would not take up a court case brought forth by the Mark Elias Group, which is responsible for a lot of the Democratic victories when it comes down to new maps, including the one in Utah. We find here that Wisconsin Supreme Court has now made the decision to appoint these three judges to hear the cases after previously announcing they would not hear the case. And so instead of going to Wisconsin Supreme Court a month later after the Mark Elias Group was denied by the Wisconsin Supreme Court, which I should, of course, note is controlled by the Democratic Party, they went to a lower court in Dane County, and the Wisconsin Supreme Court wanted it to go through a more traditional chain of approval. Meaning you go to a lower court, someone appeals the decision, then the Wisconsin Supreme Court case can either uphold the decision or not hear it. And so now what we're seeing is that they are hearing two of the lawsuits surrounding the new congressional boundaries, which could only help the Democratic Party, especially given that the Wisconsin Supreme Court is ideologically controlled by the Democratic Party. And when you take a look at the congressional boundaries in Wisconsin, it's not super difficult to see why Democrats want new boundaries in the first place. Of all of the districts here that Democrats could reasonably win, it would be Wisconsin's 3rd district, which voted for Derek Van Orden by 2.7% in the last election. But in surrounding districts like Wisconsin's 8th and Wisconsin's 1st, two districts that Republicans won by double digits, even in a Democratic wave year, it becomes difficult to see how Democrats would be able to win those seats. And even in years like 2018, when Democrats had a phenomenal year on the national level, they were winning all across the country. In the state of Wisconsin, despite winning the popular vote across the state by roughly 11 points, Democrats only won 3 out of the 8 districts in this state. And even the two that we talked about, Wisconsin's 6th and Wisconsin's 1st, which were the more competitive Republican districts at the time, these two still found themselves voting for Republicans by double digits. And 2 years later, despite Joe Biden winning Wisconsin, Republicans were able to lock down the 1st and 6th district, as well as almost win that 3rd district in the state of Wisconsin. And 2 years later, Republicans did win it, an open seat in Wisconsin's 3rd that went to Derek Van Orden, who now holds the seat. But Republicans were not worried because the map that was drawn benefits them tremendously. That even in 2024, yes, Donald Trump won the state, but only by 0.9%. And yet, 75% of congressional representation goes to the Republican Party. And so now that Wisconsin is seeing that this state Supreme Court is hearing the lawsuits surrounding the new congressional boundaries if they do end up making the recommendation that the Supreme Court must intervene, which this Supreme Court, controlled by Democrats, has intervened before. In 2023, they ordered and mandated that new state legislative maps must be put forth by the Republican legislature in the state of Wisconsin. And if you want to see what that change did, we can actually take a look at how the maps ended up in Wisconsin. In this state, the Wisconsin House of Representatives elections went from Democrats being at a state superminority at 35 seats to the Republicans' 64. And to show you just how egregious the GOP gerrymander was in this state, in 2018, Democrats won 53% of the popular vote to the Republican Party's 45%. And yet Democrats had just a third of the seats statewide and only gained one because the gerrymander was so strong that in 2020, it gave them the authority to redraw the maps again. And in 2024, the courts mandated a redraw that even though Democrats lost the popular vote by roughly 2, they still gained 10 more seats relative to the last election. And so that is an example of intervention from a state Supreme Court that said these maps are fundamentally flawed and you must redraw new ones. They didn't immediately force a court-ordered redraw of the congressional boundaries. We didn't really see that much. There was argumentation about it before, but to the degree that Democrats now have such a significant advantage on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, it becomes more likely than not that Wisconsin's Supreme Court intervenes in this upcoming year and makes that declaration. And the reason why it's notable is because there has been this conversation. Wisconsin Watch put out an article asking, will the new maps be drawn in time for 2026? They published this at the end of last month, and it was a conversation really being had about Democrats who were seeking to get the maps even heard in the first place. And there was a bit of news back in September. The Wisconsin Supreme Court ordered legal briefs in 2 of the challenges. They wanted to at least hear what people were saying before they decided to take it up. And now it seems as if they are deciding to take this case up. And chances are, given the partisan composition of the state, that back in June they said, we won't even hear the case because it did not go to the lower courts yet. Now that it's all the way up to them, after a lower court has already, agreed with the Democrats on this, you are going to find that this Supreme Court could very well rule in favor of the Democratic Party, and yet again, another defeat could be on the horizon for Donald Trump and the Republican Party on the battle for a brand new congressional map now happening in the state of Wisconsin. And really, it hasn't been on many people's radar when you look at the map here of states that are under consideration: Virginia, North Carolina, Missouri, Texas, California, Ohio, Utah, Indiana, Kansas, Florida, South Carolina, Arkansas, Indiana. These are states where you see that there is not Arkansas, rather, but South Carolina, Florida, and Indiana are in consideration here. Republicans have been open about their ideas here that they want new maps, they want to benefit the GOP, they want to, bend the knee to Trump, whatever the reasoning might be. The point is that their, understanding of it and their assumptions that are being made are only there to benefit the Republican Party, and that all of these states really, if given the green light, would have been able to do so, save the state of California and Utah and Virginia, which might not even happen, but it probably will. We'll see. The rest of these states would have been given free rein. And so now Wisconsin, which again is not even on the radar here, not even on the map under consideration, is popping up. You look down here, we're starting to see that Wisconsin now has its own, by-state conversation being had about the new maps in 2025 because this ruling here, and this not ruling, but this decision to appoint the 3-judge panels tells us the state Supreme Court is taking much further steps than what they took back in June when they refused to hear the case. And I think it really speaks to a broader problem for Donald Trump that I don't know necessarily if Wisconsin Supreme Court would have taken this up to the degree that they are right now unless Donald Trump poked the bear. Right? When Donald Trump went to Texas, he was essentially saying, this is a state where I want a new congressional map no matter what. I'm unwilling to engage in any type of conversation around a compromise. We need new boundaries in 2025 in the state of Texas, and we need them in Florida. We need them in Indiana. We need them in Missouri. We need them in North Carolina. For the most part, in Indiana, it has largely failed. We saw that the Senate will not convene for the governor's special session that's set to take place in December. We've known that the Indiana House of Representatives has the votes, but the state Senate does not. And Indiana right now seems to be holding out. In Utah, Donald Trump suffered another loss. Indiana said no. Kansas also too, which we don't talk about as much, but we mentioned it before. Kansas was in this idea, this phase of potentially doing a redraw. But again, they don't have the votes either. And in the state of Utah, the court mandated that a new map must be drawn. And if that happens in Wisconsin, you could very well see immediately a district like the 5th or 1st is turned into one that's a Democratic opportunity, and one of these more solid Republican districts could be turned into a toss-up. And you could be working with a congressional map that, if we're looking at years past to find a point of comparison, could look more like the map in 2008 rather than the map that we are working with today. And so that really shows, I think, what damage could be done to the GOP, because everything is about gaining on an individual basis, right? In Texas, they gained 5 seats, while in California, Democrats gained 5. Now, we're null. In Missouri, Republicans gained 1, but in Utah, Democrats gained 1. Now, we're null. In Ohio, Republicans in theory gained 1 or 2, depending on the year, but also they might have gained 0. That is also up in the air. In North Carolina, that's a state where Republicans gained 1, but in neighboring Virginia, set to have a new map potentially at the beginning of next year, sometime a little bit later, could potentially gain 2, 3, or 4 seats for the Democrats relative to what the map currently says, which would completely wipe out any of the gains for the GOP. And imagine this. Let's say that North Carolina comes in and Florida tries to swing a Hail Mary, where they try to draw congressional districts that are solid for the GOP in 2 to 3 to 4 more seats. Counteracted by Virginia, Wisconsin jumps into the fray and adds an additional 1 or 2 seats depending on what the state Supreme Court actually ends up ruling in favor of the Democratic Party. Wisconsin could be, again, as I said, that loss on the horizon that we're only starting to pay attention to. Because this is a state that for a while, many people thought was going to be dormant after the state Supreme Court in June said we will not hear the case. But now, they seem more than willing. And it could be, again, this response to what we've seen so far from the Republicans, this agitation that they've had against the Democrats, and Democrats are finally finding the ambition and the drive to fight back on the state legislative level, on the national level, on the congressional level, especially in battles like these. And Wisconsin may be one of those, where yes, the state Supreme Court is largely comprised of moderate Democrats who may not have been on board with this a year ago or 2 years ago when they won the majority, but are now, and are willing to look the other way and allow what might be their appointment of lower court judges to make the declaration and ultimately decide to not hear the case or to rule in favor of said lower court. And if that ends up being the case, Wisconsin could see a brand new congressional map ahead of 2026, one that would undeniably, no matter how you draw the map, benefit the Democratic Party, because what exists currently is a Republican gerrymander. And there is no way on hell that a Democratic-controlled Wisconsin Supreme Court ends up ruling a map that benefits the GOP further. And so that's where we're standing right now. Republicans, who are at 6 seats in the state of Wisconsin, could very well find themselves with losing 1 or 2 seats across the state. And it is because Democrats are continuing to pursue, in the face of adversity, these congressional boundary challenges in state Supreme Courts, in courts across the country. Federal, local, state, whatever it might be. Because this Wisconsin one in July began at a county court in Dane. And now it's with the Wisconsin Supreme Court. So we will see what happens. As it stands presently, Democrats could be in for another victory in a state where nobody, and I mean nobody, was seeing it coming. But still, a state to watch, and one that if it ends up in fact in favor of the Democratic Party in the way that it might, it could be a tremendously big gain for the Democratic Party and a feeling that shows them exactly what, victory might look like in 2026 and make it that much easier with a leg up in 1 or 2 of these other districts, which would be quite substantive for the Democratic Party at large, especially as Republicans really scramble to find any states that they can go to further. It looks like they're running out of time, and Democrats are expanding it. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server if you go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 House election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.